some of you may not know about Joshua's altar, and we're going to look at some of those things. So basically, we have the Exodus from Egypt, and we have them leaving the Exodus, and of course they travel for 40 years in the wilderness. And then Joshua died, or excuse me, Moses, Miriam, and Aaron die. And then Joshua takes the children of Israel across the border, the Jordan River, into the promised land, and they begin colonizing, and that takes some time. So one of the things they do is they go to a place where there's Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And he basically re-enters this covenant that Moses had talked about. Here's the Mosaic law. This is what God wants us to do. If you're going to enter this and not follow directions, you're cursed. And if you're going to enter this and follow directions, you will be blessed. And here's what the Lord would do. He'll keep you well. He'll bless your crops, etc. And then, and then they have to go in and fight the giants. So that's what's going on. And we've noticed that for a long time. But the interesting thing about it is the skeptics have always said, well, it's myth. It never happened. So when Joshua's altar was finally found about a decade or so back, it was a big deal. And everybody's like, yeah, who knows what kind of altar it was. But it matches the design in the Talmud and in other ancient books. The sacrificial animals found on the site are only kosher animals, etc. So it's interesting. So we wanted to go through this. So with that in mind, let's stop for a minute, because the controversy has been everything's a myth, nothing ever happened. Well, then when you find evidence, and there's tons of evidence, we found bullas of kings of Israel, the prophet Isaiah, just all sorts of things like that from all around the area. So that is Israel. Jerusalem is Jerusalem, and the Bible passages are correct. But what they try to do, they consistently say, well, maybe part of it's correct, maybe part of it's not. And what's going on is that we're going to have the debates on these things. Now, the secular scholars have long said there's no evidence in Egyptian documents about the Exodus. And the Exodus is biblical, therefore it's, questionable. And it's interesting to me because one of the first books that I wrote was Ancient Post-Flood History. And what we tried to do in that one is look at real briefly the pre-flood history, and then look at the 16 grandsons of Noah, where they went, what nations came from them. And then we look at the Bible, Jewish history books, and then go to those sites, wherever those may be, and try to find records that match, or at least partially match, the written text from the Bible and the other Jewish history books. And there's actually quite a few. Most people don't know about the Naas stone in, I think it's Somalia, Egypt. It's in a museum now, but it basically talks about the fact that there was a pharaoh. It doesn't say who, but there was a pharaoh whose entire army was destroyed in a whirlpool, which is really interesting because a lot of times they talk about the Exodus from Egypt. It was a landmass, and it was only about 2 or 3 inches for an army to drown in 2 or 3 inches of water. They make up stuff all the time about maybe it was this, maybe it was this, maybe it was naturally occurring. And it doesn't matter. As believers, we know this stuff, and it doesn't faze us, and we already know what happened. But people keep trying to twist the doctrine. So with that in mind, let's look this up real quick. Let's go. This is the Essene calendar. And just a real quick mention, this is 2022. It's past New Year's, which is here. We are broadcasting on 3/28, which is Monday. It's Monday night, or a normal thing. So this is Nisan 6. So a week from tomorrow is Passover on their calendar. 14 days after the first of the year, so 14th of Nisan. Then you've got the week of unleavened bread, and we'll come back and look at those later. I just kind of wanted to start, if there's anything around where we're talking, to look at the calendar again and try to get the calendar in our mind. So this is the beginning of this year. So let me go to here. Now, of course, this is from dsscalendar.org, one of our websites. And here is, I blew it up a little bit, but this is talking about how the calendar works and some of the dates. And so I blew this up just to show you here. There's a BC date. So AD and BC we're very familiar with. This is 2022 AD, and the Exodus would have been somewhere back BC. So the AM date is BC, or AD rather, is Anno Domini, from the year of our Lord. So it's from when Jesus was born going forward. And it may or may not be off, but that's how it's supposed to work, from the birth of the Messiah. AM may or may not be off, but it's supposed to be from the beginning of creation. So we're going up to there. And then the Jubilee count, it's in ages, unas, jubilees, shmitas, and years. And it's really hard for me anyway, as a person, to look at it and do that. I like the AM scale. And of course, I'm used to ADBC, so it gets kind of confusing. But I bring this up just so that we can show you these dates match in the Hebrew versions. So if you're using Genesis and Kings and Chronicles, or you're using the Seder Olam, or you're using the book of Jasher, or even parts of the Talmud up to the time of the Persians, the dates all match. When we look at the Greek, it's not just the Greek is different. There's about 5 or 6 different versions of the Greek, and they're all slightly different. So we got to be careful with that. But just looking at the dates, let's go over this real quick. So we've got creation. Now, creation, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, was the spring equinox at a certain year. And so we have that listed, and we'll explain why, but 3925 BC. Bishop Ussher had it at 4004. So we're all in the ballpark there somewhere. It's not been billions and billions of years or anything like that. So supposedly it was Nisan 1, in the year 1, the creation occurred, and that would have been the spring equinox. So if you look at Genesis 5, you can tally up the dates, and that gets us to Genesis 5 gets you to Noah. And then in chapter 7 and 8, it talks about the flood being in the 600th year of Noah's life. On the 17th day of the second month of that year is when the flood occurred. So we know the flood then occurred at the 17th of ER, which is the mid-spring cycle, actually, in the year 1656. So 1,656 years, 1 month and 17 days after creation, according to their calendar, is when the flood occurred. Okay, and so this is nice and everything, and there's a lot of stuff we could look at. And eventually I do want to take the first age, the first 2,000 years, which is the history of Genesis, probably the first 20 chapters or so, but fill in the gaps with Jasher, Josephus, comments from the church fathers, Dead Sea Scrolls, and the like. And it'll be pretty interesting, I think. So we'll get there. But anyway, so if we get just from Genesis, then 1656, 1 month, 17 days after creation is the flood. Okay, well, then you can go to Genesis chapter 10 and 11, actually, and go from the flood, Shem and Arphaxad, and go down with the lineage to the birth of Abraham. So we find that Abraham was born about 300 years later. It's in the year 1948 AM. So and he supposedly, according to some records, I assume this is correct, born on the 1st of Nisan. And the only reason I put the dates in here is because on our calendar, from March to December, it's the same year. But as soon as you get into January, we have a new year. It's 1 year up, but it's not a new year up yet until the following March. So anytime it's in January, February, or March, we need to remember there's a year difference as far as calculations go. Since these are all in the spring and the summer, there's no year differences. So it's exactly the year specified. So we get up to Abraham's birth, and then we're told when he's 70, he has this covenant. And so 70 years later would be 2018 AM, and that was on the 15th of Nisan. Now, we're not told in the Bible it was the 15th of Nisan when it's talking about the covenant. That's in Genesis 15. But when you get to the Exodus chapter 12, it says that it was exactly 430 years, after the covenant was made. And it says it was to the day from when the promise was given. So, and we know that they went out on Nisan 15. So if it's to the day, this would also be Nisan 15. So we tack that on. 400 years is 430 years gets us up to 2448 for the date of the Exodus. And then you can go on from there and record Solomon's temple being dedicated and then destroyed. And we've got the information down here, how we get it on this site. And then we get up to Messiah's death, Israel's second birth. These are all calculated on these dates. And we have a Dead Sea Scroll, 11Q13, that tells us Messiah dies in 32 AD. So, I mean, all these different manuscripts from all over have the same dating system, give or take a year, just to be, easy. But that's the pattern, some of the things we've been teaching. And this is consistent. So if this is correct, the Exodus would have been, if you back it up and put it on AD-BC scale, we have it right here. So the Exodus from Egypt would have been 1478 BC. Okay. So yeah, give or take a couple of years. But the point is, this has always been the dating system. Around 1500 BC, more or less, is when the Exodus occurs. Well, the skeptics, again, they're not paying attention to the black stone in the Somalia. They're not paying attention to the writings of the sage. They're not paying attention to Manetho. They're not paying attention to all the other documents, the writings of the pharaohs, the dynasties that are written, actually carved on the walls in the Abydos temple. Go along with what Jasher says, and then you can actually pinpoint who the Pharaoh of the Exodus was. I mean, it's all actually pretty easy, but they don't want to look at any of that evidence and just say, we don't know, it's prehistory. So if you ignore all that, then it's odd that there's no Israeli Exodus mentioned in Egyptian history. Of course, it mentions Egypt was totally destroyed, and then they just say, we don't know why. So anyway, but the point is, with our study tonight, the scholars noticed that there was a Hyksos group about 200 or 300 years or later, okay, in time. So they're assuming that maybe the Hyksos group is a Semitic group, might have been the Israelites. And there's other reasons too. So basically what they said is the Exodus didn't happen around 1500 BC. It's actually around 1200 BC. Now, despite the fact that there's no evidence for who the Hyksos was, there's no written records, this kind of stuff, and none of them say that they were Israelites or there was a Moses or a Joshua or anything like that. But that's when this has been going on. So liberal scholarship is going to say the Exodus, it never happened. There was some Israelites there a couple of hundred years later, but that messes the chronology up. It's all myth. Okay. So that brings us to our study tonight, because I first learned about this with a friend of mine, Aaron Lipkin, Avi Lipkin's son. We've done a lot of prophecy seminars together. And so he first brought this out because he was raised, and he tells you his story. He was raised as an Orthodox Jew, believing the scriptures in Israel. Then he goes to Israel, and the teachers, secular teachers, basically say, well, that's our history, but it's a myth. It never really happened. And he's kind of getting disillusioned, as an adult. And he has always been interested in the land and his heritage. And one thing leads to another, and he meets this professor, Adam Zattal, and he says that he believes everything is correct, and he thinks he's found Joshua's altar. And so that excites him, and he starts working with him. So it's an interesting thing. So over the last decade and a half, there has been a lot of hubbub about that, because everyone said, the liberals again, are going to say there's no Joshua's altar because there is no formation of an altar or anything like that, either on Mount Ebal or on Mount Gerizim. It just flat is not there. Okay, so the thing is that you're thinking about, you've got two mountains, say like these are mountains, you're assuming it's on this side of the mountain or on this side of the mountain, so that if you're in the valley, you could look up and see it. Well, what happened is, on the Mount Ebal, it's not actually on this side of the mountain, it's on the other side of the mountain, just at the top on the other side, to protect it probably from winds or something. So anyway, long story short, they found Joshua's altar, and this has been out for a while. So with this in mind, let me share you this. This is a remake of the altar, And this form has actually been drawn in several books, Talmudic books. So the Israelis have always known this is kind of what Joshua's altar looks like. So here's the altar up top, and the four horns or corners of the altar. There's an ascension that you go up to sacrifice. There are these two places where they store things for the sacrifice. And then there's another little ledge here that comes up here that goes around the base of the altar. So like you're supposed to catch the blood from the horns of the altar. So this is the basic idea. And so you can go and Google Mount Ebal altar, Joshua's altar, and now you will come up with a lot of pictures. And so here's probably one of the better ones. And I'm just getting this off of, started to say Google, it's actually Microsoft Bing. But so as you can see how the formation is. So this is pretty interesting. And they've had this for a while and it's been around. And I think if you go visit Israel with the Lipkin tours, they take you to these kind of places rather than the standard places. And that's fantastic to me. So there's a lot of interesting things here. So let me just back out of that here. So there's a lot of these. Here's another picture of it from a distance. And again, you can, there's several of these. Now, that's probably not actually it. That's probably another one. But it gives you the idea. So you can look these things up. So, and this is the format. So basically, without doing this, they looked at this, and there's this is the bigger one over a much older, smaller one. And in the smaller one, there have ashes of sacrificial animals. Like we said, they're only kosher. So this is an altar that goes way back, no dating necessarily because it's just stones, but it goes way back, probably the time of Joshua. It's in the location of where Joshua built the altar. The sacrificial animals are only kosher animals, so it was sacrificed by Jews, not, Canaanites or pagans or whatever. So this, as a Christian, I'm going to say, yeah, this is it. And that it's not airtight necessarily. I don't know that anything is ever airtight. But the scholars first said, well, this is probably some pagan Canaanite altar. Yeah, with kosher food. But it's eventually they started looking at these things. So what brings us to our thing today is an archaeological group in Israel this last week came out with a discovery because they'd been waiting to figure out exactly how these things work. And what they did was the original people that excavated this, they didn't do all the high-tech scans and different ways of looking for things. So they basically just took the dirt, moved it, put the stones back, and that's what you have out there. And so this other group got permission and went through where they dumped the dirt. Now they looked for things, but of course you don't find everything. So they did lots of scans and they found a lot of interesting pieces. And they said so far they've only went through, and it takes time and money, and you got to get permission. They've only went through about a third of the rubble. But in this rubble, they found a stone. Actually, they're calling it an amulet, but it's actually just a tablet. It's a very small tablet, and this is it here. And you can't hardly see anything with it. If you know a little bit of the ancient Hebrew, you can begin to read some of this here. But basically, what it is and they didn't even speculate on what it is. But you know how, like in lodges, courtrooms, things like that, you have black balls and white balls, and you sit in judgment on somebody that they did or didn't do whatever, and you put your ball in the thing, and you see if they're all white or all black or whatever. So black ball means he's guilty, white ball means he's innocent, a court type system. Well, they would have had something like that, only these are tablets. One that have the curses of Israel from Mount Ebal. This is out of Joshua, like around chapter 8. And then the blessings, if you remember the ceremony. If you do what the Lord has said, you'll have blessings. If you do what the Lord has told you not to, you will be cursed. So that's how that one goes. So they found this, and they didn't say much about it, but they got excited because it looks like ancient Hebrew. Not Paleo Hebrew, which is what we're going to get to here in a minute. But they went ahead and took this to some places that have the technology to scan through objects. And so the idea was, and what this is you have a plate and you've got writing on it, and then it's heated, and then the whole thing is bent together like an amulet, or not an amulet, but a locket. A locket with a picture of your sweetie and something else, a date or whatever, and it's sealed. Well, once you do that and it cools, it's permanent. And so they don't want to try to open it. That would destroy it, possibly. So it's kind of just the way it is. But there's types of technology that you can scan layer by layer. And if you scan it just right on the inside, you can pick up what's written if there's anything written. And so they did that and got excited to see that there's some writing on the inside, and they don't have the whole thing translated, but this is what came back on one of the layers. So the translation to this thing is cursed, 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 cursed by the God Jehovah or Yahweh. You will die cursed, cursed you will surely die, cursed by Yahweh or Jehovah. It's YHV or W, which can be an O. Cursed, cursed, cursed. Now, at first, when they looked at this, some people started saying, well, it's probably a amulet, to curse people or whatever. And of course, that's not the way it works back then. This is one of those things that you would go to Mount Ebal, you would sit in judgment. If it was proven that you were an idolater, you would be executed. And so this would be read, and you're probably not handcuffed, but tied. This would be put around your neck, and you would be sentenced. Everybody would know you were sentenced to death. You'd be taken away and executed. And so that's the way it was, any kind of idolatry. So this isn't an amulet that's going to do something magical. This is simply that type of tablet. So it's a legal document. So the interesting things about it is this is the word for God, YHW, and we know it's YHVH. So there's no H at the end, at least we don't see one anyway. And this reminds me, when you look at the Septuagint, if you go back to, I think there's 2 or 3 of the really older kind, instead of having YHVH, it actually has, I think it's AIO, something like that, 3 letters. And of course, the Y can be an I, the H can be an A sound, so it could be an A or an E. And then the W or the V, the Vav, could be a V, could be an O, could be a U. So it depends on how it's spelled in the letters or in the word, whatever word we're talking about. And of course, this is the name of God. So we see it in the Septuagint, the really old versions, and the really old versions of the Hebrew. So here's the deal. The Hebrew script that we're familiar with, alphabet, like when you pick up a book and it's in Hebrew and you open it and you see the letters, that's Hebrew script that comes from the time of Babylon forward. So if you find an ancient document written in that, it is 500 BC or forward. Okay. If you find that with vowel points, for instance, the vowel points were added in the 7th century AD. So it's going to be 700 AD forward. Now, before that, which the Dead Sea Scrolls are written in a type of Paleo-Hebrew. So Paleo-Hebrew can go all the way back to the time of the patriarchs, the time of David, that century. So the Paleo-Hebrew is the script that you see when you look at an actual Dead Sea Scroll. So if you look up the Dead Sea Scrolls online and you see it's not really cursive, but it's different than the standard square block script, that's the Paleo-Hebrew. This particular thing is written in the Hebrew that's the version back from that. So basically, we're talking about, and this is the exciting part, because the tablet, the language on the tablet, the script that it's written in, everything points to the fact of being 13 or 1400 BC. And that's a long time period, but if Joshua came into the 1200s, and then it was a sacred site, and then the sacred site was moved, and they started using Mount Ebal as a judgment site, it's going to be 50 or 100 years or so past that. So you're talking about 10th century, 11th century BC that you would find something like this. And it would be written in the Paleo-Hebrew script. In this case, if Joshua came as the Bible and the other manuscripts say, it would have been 1500, or they would have come in basically 14 to 1500 BC. This would have been used as a judgment hall for the next couple of hundred years. So way before the languages changed. So this is the translation of it. Again, this is what the object looks like. But I want to show you in the press release. This is a drawing of what they saw. So you can see YHW or YHV, and you can see it in this far. This is a Y from the really old script. And this kind of looks like a man with upheld arms and legs. And that's what it is. Hey, for like hallelujah, for praise. That's the symbol. So this is a really, really old version of this. And then the W or the V. And so this is what has appeared so far in that. So pulling all this together, we're simply saying that this proves that Joshua's altar, well, all of it together, somebody built Joshua's altar, what we're calling Joshua's altar, on the other side of Mount Ebal. So it's on Mount Ebal, where Joshua, the Bible says Joshua built the altar. It has nothing but kosher sacrifices in it. And this was found with it. So this is not square script Hebrew, not Paleo Hebrew, but ancient Hebrew. So this puts this amulet back to the time of the 1400s BC, which is either right at the time it was built or sometime thereafter. We got to remember when we talk about things like this, we need to say it's at least so many years old, because it could always be older. And manuscripts are like that. So it's in that area. So in either way, that Hebrew manuscript, this tablet with curses from Joshua at what's probably Joshua's altar, which is an Israeli settlement or fort or altar, dates from about 1400 BC, more or less. So the 12th century idea is out the window. There's just no way of doing this. So as a believer, I'm going to look at this and say, yeah, that's what Joshua says. Just pick the Bible up and read it. But it's a really big deal, or will become a really big deal in the future. So with that, I wanted to share one other thing with you. And this is what's interesting. I want to share with you, here is the text out of the Bible. And this is Joshua chapter 8, starting with verse 30, the last part of it. So they come in, they have these ceremonies, and Joshua builds the altar. So remember, that's the altar we were just looking at. Joshua built an altar unto the Lord, God of Israel, on Mount Ebal. That's where it was, and we've seen that tonight. Moses, the servant of God, commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of whole stones, over which no man had lifted up any iron, and they offered thereon burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. He wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. Now, I want you to focus on this. So again, and we'll come back to this, but we have this manuscript, which is this tablet found there, which is the type of Hebrew in the time of Joshua, talking about the curses. And if we back up to some of the pictures of the altar, now this is a recreation, so to me it looks like somebody's chiseled it. But if we go back to see if some of that's in here. Okay, I guess I got rid of it. If you go back to some of the other ones, you'll see that it's just stones. But what they did was they got stones, they put them together, made everything fairly good. And what they're going to wind up doing then is coating this stuff with plaster. So they coat it with plaster, and then you can actually write on the plaster, carve it, or however that works. And so the law of Moses, whatever the original law of Moses was written by Joshua in the presence of the children of Israel, would have been on these stones. Now, when they dug it up, they separated a lot of stuff and tried to recreate this with the stones. there was a lot of plaster. Now, it's not plaster necessarily in the way that we would have made plaster 100 years ago, but it's a coating for the stones. So this type of coating, similar to the inscription that we found here, it may be almost impossible to read. Okay, so here's the deal. If you have the ability to scan it layer by layer, you could probably read what's on it. No technology existed at that time, so the plaster was put in an airtight storage facility to be protected until such a time as they have this. Now, the fact that this was sent off with new imaging technology was able to read the inside of this, and the inside is actually translated here. And again, this kind of Hebrew. So with that in mind, it is possible that later on this summer or later on this fall, not only would they translate the rest of this little device here, but they could actually start imaging and pulling written text off of the plaster that has been stored from Joshua's altar. If they do that, and if they're successful, think about this for a minute. We will have, and I'll collect them one way or the other, and I'll scan them and I'll get them out there to everybody. But we will have photos, PDFs, photos of those scans. And what we will be looking at is the handwritten law of Moses written on this plaster by Joshua, son of Nun, in the presence of all of the princes of Israel 3,500 years ago. Just want that to kind of sink in for a minute. So if this is successful and they're able to pull it off, we will have that. So just kind of wanted to share that with you. So let's look and see if there's anything else that I wanted to say. Here we go. So again, he creates an altar, does the burnt offerings, and he, this is Joshua, wrote thereupon, upon the stones, a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. We have the plaster. It's possible we could get a digital image of it sometime. And all Israel and their elders and the officers and all of their judges, and this is interesting too, stood on this side of the ark and on that side before the priests and the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, as well as and I want you to look at this, the stranger and he that was born among them. So this is, if you go look this up, this is a native-born Israeli. Now the law says if I'm a Gentile and I convert to Judaism, I become equal just as I was a native born. I'm called a native born. The stranger is actually a ger, or a ger toshav, a ger zedek, something like that, is a Gentile who worships the Lord, does not do idolatry, but does not fully convert to Judaism. So he's like a second-class citizen. He can't marry a Jewish girl, etc. He doesn't get circumcised. He doesn't eat kosher, and that kind of thing. So we have in the text, for instance, Nathan is the best example of a ger. He was actually a Netan, and a Netan is a descendant of those Gibeonites that came in. They made an agreement with him. So Gibeonites were forbidden to intermarry or convert to Judaism. They had to stay independent and be servants of the Lord. So here you have a Gentile, uncircumcised, and we know he's uncircumcised because circumcision is the last piece you do of conversion, and he's forbidden to convert. And this is recorded in multiple places. But so he is a Gentile that does not eat kosher, does not get circumcised. He will observe the Sabbath when he's in the area of the Jews doing things with him. When he's home, he may or may not. But this person then is a prophet of God. God will speak to Nathan, but will not speak to David. Nathan, the Gentile ger prophet, is teaching David, the king of Israel, how to be the best king of Israel. They were Torah scholars, they understood everything, but we have to understand that priests do priestly things, kings do kingly things, Jews in general do Jewish things, Gentiles do other things. Now, none of them can worship idols. None of them can do things. So it's this whole concept. And this kind of stuff will begin to come out more and more. Our hyper Hebrew roots friends are in error when they do this. Let's look at this real quick. This is King James, and we're in Joshua 8:33, just to share you that real quick. So, okay, so as well as he that was born among them, that is as you can see, native born. And here the word translated stranger is a ger. And they're translating it like guest or foreigner or alien. And so that would actually be Azur. Ger is a specific type. So anyway, it's really interesting to look at these things. Tonight, I just really wanted to share with you this ancient Hebrew manuscript off of the curse tablet. So this primarily proves that Joshua and the Exodus occurred at the time the Bible says it occurred, not in the 1200s, but in the 1400s. So we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight.